Welcome to the institutional and learning background of climate change education. I'm Professor Michael Scoullos, the coordinator of PARCCCE, and we will discuss the issue of the climate change education and the aims, of course. The main one is to promote appropriate behavioral changes to address climate crisis. Behavioral changes related to climate change are based on thorough understanding of the situation, therefore knowledge, but also values necessary for the survival and well-being of our societies, not only now, but also in the future, and in particular for the future. To teach others on these values, you need first, as an educator, to adopt all these values yourself and support our teaching and suggestions on solid and objective science-based knowledge and of course the respect for both nature and our audience, our students. In this exchange, we have a number of contents, starting with the recent evidence on climate change education and action in schools to see where we are globally, revisiting the foundations and evolution of ESD, and remembering that the climate change education is an integral part of ESD, of Education for Sustainable Development. Also describing briefly the policy context of the climate change education, climate action, referring to the whole institute, whole school approach and the links with the climate change education and action, giving some examples, good practices, lessons learned, and key takeaways from global school experiences, and ending with the sites and references that you may use in your teachings. Now, on the first one, on the evidence, we have to see that a very important survey carried out by UNESCO in 22 gave us some alarming results. I mean, they surveyed 17,500 students. 70% of them were not able to explain, or they were, they had extremely basic knowledge on climate change. They didn't know what to do about climate change, and also it was not part of their thinking, knowledge. Definitely they didn't know how important climate change is for our life and our economy and our society. The youth asked for learner-centered, experiential ways of learning, asked for solution-based action, and also wanted further participation in decision-making. How to participate in decision-making without having a basic knowledge on the issue. This is very important for everybody to understand. And this is why climate change education is obviously necessary. From another UNESCO 21 Learn for Our Planet global review, the results show that approximately 50% of the countries had no mention of climate change in their national curricula. 95% of the primary and secondary teachers felt that teaching climate change is important, and almost 23% expressed a readiness to teach it. However, teachers say that the coverage of ESD and climate crisis is the lack of having this in the curriculum was the most profound barrier. But also they expressed their anxiety in how to teach. They didn't have relevant education themselves, neither on the theory or on practice. Also, from the global survey of the period 2022-23, the world's largest lesson, 37,000 students participated globally. We have some optimistic results in the sense that 32% said that courage and determination are the most important skills needed to make change. 59% want to learn more about how to manage money and budget related issues. They have contributed, 35% they believe that they have contributed to make their school better, and almost 50% of them want to be active and learn how to protect the planet. This is optimistic. Even if it is 50%, it is a big percentage that have this tendency. So we see that from this learning series, we see the how they see the climate-proof and climate-ready school to look like. They feel it that it should be waste-free, using green energy, having still a student agency, outdoor, and the whole school approaches as important components. Also, on how can learning institutions, schools, become climate-proof and climate-ready, they see that the funding is important, which is not with them, but they see that environmental clubs and capacity building of their educators are important, with government support and teacher training as important, and of course sustainable infrastructures. In the same series, students concerning climate change feel that they need more instruction on how to influence social changes as citizens. And then comes more on links between climate change and other social issues, and of course values and wisdom to live as part of nature, and surprisingly less, but important still, more on scientific facts on climate change. So they value in in what they wish to learn the social components of the issue of climate change. In PARCCCE, for starting our own work, we carried out a very short and limited survey with 272 educators from formal and non-formal education from all 4 countries of the project. And you can see that which approaches they consider most engaging. First comes the outdoor activities and field visits. The second, experiences and hands-on activities. And the third, brainstorming discussions. Of course, other things like also debates and using multimedia, science and technology, of course, are there with lower percentages. Also, identifying gaps in the learning resources for climate change. They have lack of demonstrating solutions and actions, lack of systemic approaches, particularly in linking climate change to people, economy, and the rest. There are also people who think that it's too theoretical, the lessons they had, perhaps not appropriate for their age, with no field work. In some cases, language barrier, and this is why our material is produced in all languages of the countries participating, and insufficient, not updated, if you wish, old-fashioned content on climate in the school curriculum. And this is, of course, in an issue like climate change, where we have considerable new data every day. This requires a system and awareness of educators and willingness to introduce and integrate new knowledge. Also, there are identified by the teachers misunderstandings, misconceptions, and the main one is that students still feel far from the problem. As a space, not affected, my country, my town, not really affected by climate change, is something that takes place somewhere else or much later. Also, some very superficial approach without ability to distinguish causes and effects, adaptation from mitigation measures, and so on and so forth. In general, weak systemic thinking approaches fail to frame climate change as a social and economic issue, in most cases merely limited to environment. Also in scientific terms, excuse me, there are confusions between weather and climate. natural and human-induced warming, confusion with ozone layer depletion, and so on and so forth. Also, in many cases, there is a confusion between climate change and atmospheric pollution in general. Also, forms of disinterest, indifference, or denial, having other priorities, believe that cities or new tech will solve it, these kind of things. Also, issues prevailing in the family culture and beliefs, and no correlation between personal actions, lifestyle, and climate. They don't really understand and realize that carbon-intensive lifestyle affects the global issue. And about the effective learning material, they consider nearly, a very high percentage that the connection, establishing the connection between climate change and everyday life is very important. And then comes the self-efficacy and responsibility, and also using a variety of media, the different formats, images, videos, infographics, text, etc., are important for them. Now, an important part, as we said, is to capitalize on the overall ESD, because climate change education, as we said from the beginning, is an integral part of education for sustainable development, which is a rather new topic, having a history of few decades. So I'm going to elaborate more on this issue, because whatever we say there is directly linked and useful for education for climate change. And I would like to start by reminding ourselves about the background of the relationship between man and the environment. Humans were part of the environment, and actually at that time we used to call them the natural world, and humans at that time were just one element of this natural world. Very soon, from the moment they were already in the caves, they started putting questions and realizing that humans is something different from the rest. So nature became environment. So environment is by itself a very anthropocentric notion. And they realized that apart from the natural environment, there are other aspects of the environment. Starting, let's say, with tools, stones, wooden and other instruments, tools. They started the technological, the man-made environment, doing things that other species were not able to do. At the same time, they started decorating their bodies, or writing and making starting painting and communicating with others, creating languages. So the cultural, man-made, of course, environment was another aspect of environment. And of course, they started asking from where I come, where I go, who has created this natural environment, the supernatural, the spiritual. So all these three are important anthropogenic environments, aspects of the environment, based on the natural, which is dynamic, but its dimensions are the same practically from the beginning of our history. So little by little, these other aspects, the cultural, the technological in particular, or the spiritual, started becoming dominant on the natural, which remained the same. The biosphere actually is shrinking today. The biosphere, the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, parts of the natural system remain more or less the same for millennia, while all the other, and in particular in the last centuries, the technological man-made environment, followed in different ways also by the cultural and spiritual, create what we call today anthroposphere. And this anthroposphere is becoming so big, particularly because it is also followed by the increase of the population, the expansion of the population, which from the period of the revolution, the industrial revolution, in the beginning of the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, increased the population, increased from 1 billion in, let's say, 1820 to 8 billions today. So it's amazing that the whole history, the human population was of the order of millions or hundreds of millions, and now we are talking about billions. So another aspect that we need to understand, particularly when we are discussing about influencing behavior through education, are the three levels of human involvement with nature, environment, and shaping the values and ethos, always addressing, let's say, the environmental pollution. The first thing most of us think is self-interest, personal benefit from a clean environment, how to avoid diseases or problems of health, and for ourselves and our families. So it's self-interest there for the protection. There is a second level, which is still very anthropogenic, which is the social good. More altruistic, but still anthropogenic. And we understand that water, for example, is a social good. We need to have it as society. We need to have it for our production, and so on and so forth. But there is also a non-anthropogenic, let's say, self-interest for the environment, usefulness for the environment. This is the respect, the admiration, the intrinsic value of the environment, which is an ecocentric, not anthropocentric approach. So for each one of us, every individual combines all the three, of course, in totally different percentages, let's say. And the environmental education, education for sustainable development, and climate change education uses all that. And of course, a person who feels responsible for the future recognizes more the intrinsic value of the environment and the functions of this environment. As I said, the whole movement of environmental education, education for sustainable development, and climate change education is very recent. In the 60s and 1960s, 1970s, we started having the introduction of environmental education. Of course, we had nature approaches, outdoor approaches already in the previous centuries, but in the format and the concept as we know it today, it was developed in the 60s and 70s as a result, actually, of pollution mainly. And so the first ecological principles were very closely linked with the understanding of geochemical cycles, and in this way they were also behind the climate change, although at that moment it was not in the center of the interest. We understood at that time the much more visible forms of environmental problems with pollution of waters, of the air, and so on and so forth, or with specific emissions, and also the dangers of nuclear accidents and so on and so forth. Some of the first important documents, the Limits to Growth report of MIT and ordered by the Club of Rome, the Stockholm Conference of on Human Environment in '72 included in the results a sentence mentioning the need for environmental education as a tool for the protection of the environment. And in '75 we had the scientific basis of environmental education in Belgrade, which was formalized with the International Conference of Tbilisi in '77, the Intergovernmental Conference on Environmental Education. All this focused on the protection of the environment, natural and cultural, and through the protection of the environment to the development. So there was the assumption that from the moment we have a clean environment, development will follow, the proper development will follow, which was a rather naive approach in the sense that we know that in many cases where the environment was actually not was very appropriate, we had at the same time development, while in other cases in areas where we didn't have interventions and the environment was left untouched, in inverted commas, we didn't have development. In this way, and this was the starting point of environmental education, seeing our planet as a spaceship, and our planet was considered as the environment, the natural environment, and the human overstructure on that, which actually are the society, human society, economy, and human institutions. So in 10 years after Tbilisi, we had in 87 in Moscow a meeting again, trying to see what was the progress of environmental education. And at that time, I had as a very young scientist, I was asked to prepare one of the background documents on the international comprehension and problems of the current environment, the role of environmental education, and education as a vehicle of international understanding and peace. And at that time, it was exactly when they have commissioned what became later Our Common Future report of Gro Harlem Brundtland, and I identified that as a potentially influential document for education. Indeed, in 1992, we had the famous Rio Conference, which introduced the notion of sustainable development. And in chapter 36 of Agenda 21, we have actually the education for sustainable development. This was, we are talking about the three pillars of sustainable development: environment or ecology, economy, and society. And we organized in Athens in '96, together with UNESCO, a meeting about the reorientation of environmental education towards sustainable development, which decided to hold a major UNESCO conference supported by the government of Greece. This is the reorienting, and UNESCO put a halt there to environmental education, saying we need to go further and deeper. And so in Tbilisi plus 20 in Thessaloniki, I had the honor to be the coordinator of the conference. We had 1,300 registered participants from 87 countries, producing a book of 862 pages. Imagine the volume of that. You can download it from the MEDI's webpage. We discussed the famous Thessaloniki Declaration, which is the first one on education for sustainable development, discussing the tools and also the relevant legislation, institutions, economy that we need. In Thessaloniki, we started trying to see how we'll call this. We attempted to use environmental education. We had differences with those representing education, social education or development education. And at the end of the day, we decided to call it education for environment and sustainability, which didn't fly too much. And we continued then with education for sustainable development. When we had the preparations of the Johannesburg summit in 2002, there was a campaign by MIO, the Education Reaffirmation for 21st Century, together with few other initiatives from Japan and other countries. And we proposed the decade for education for sustainable development in Bali and then in Johannesburg. There we had also the establishment of MEDIS, the Mediterranean Educational Initiative for Environment Sustainability, which is a platform of now of 6,500 approximately educators from the Mediterranean and beyond as a UN Type 2 initiative. We proposed the education, we achieved the agreement for a decade 2005-2014 with UNESCO as the lead UN agency, and within this we transformed the Greek temple, let's say, format into the tetrahedron for sustainable development. So in trying to put as a basis education there. Very soon we realized that education alone cannot achieve sustainability, but being one major element of that, of what? Of governance. So this is the starting point of education for sustainable development. First of all, understanding the importance of governance for achieving sustainable development. Actually, also the climate change is in this tetrahedron, as we'll see later on, and we understand now education as part of the analysis of the governance. But before I change that, I have to show you here that if we turn the tetrahedron on environment, we have something very similar to the starting point I explained before. So we have not abandoned the original idea of the human overstructure sitting on the environment, but we have become much more sophisticated and analytic in order to achieve the objectives of sustainable development. So the analysis now of governance, where we include education, is this one. I mean, how we govern. We govern with laws, institutions, regulations, absolutely necessary. At the same time, with science and technology. Science and technology enhances enormously the carrying capacity of the system. But all this, in order to respect laws, in order to use technology in the appropriate way, you need information, you need awareness raising, you need education and culture. So there is how we interact with the system. And it's nice to see the combination with the governance and the previous one. And here is the content now of ESD. Because what we need is to understand basic things about the natural environment, the society, the economy, but also promote the appropriate institutions. Institutions are not only legal, regulatory, are also financial. Funding is also there. Science and technology and culture, the necessary understanding also for the climate change, because it is at the end of the day something that has not been yet fully embedded in our culture. So the climate change education is in the center, is integrated in this. So indeed, for climate change education, we need to understand natural environment, but also economy, society, and we need, in order to solve the problems, rely on the different tools of different nature, as I said, institutional, regulatory, science, technology, and awareness, cultural. Let us see now the global and also, excuse me, the regional institution policies that help in climate education and action as parts, as I mentioned, of the ESD. The Mediterranean strategy of education for sustainable development was approved by the ministers of environment in Athens in 2014 and presented. It was the only strategy presented in the Aichi Nagoya concluding conference of the decade of the ESD, and we are very proud of that. The action plan of the Mediterranean strategy of education for sustainable development was adopted by the Mediterranean ministers in 2016 and by the education ministers in the same year. Now, after that, in 2022, 5 years later, we had a revision of the action plan going towards 2030, which is also the date to achieve the SDGs. And in this action plan, education is recognized, important. Also, all activities are not restricted within the schools, but we discuss the links with stakeholders and policymakers and the society. One of the main activities recommended was the training of trainers. We have managed through projects with the European Union to train more than 5,500 educators of the southern Mediterranean countries, and new trainings are planned in the coming 3 years, including till the end of 27, perhaps also 28. And PARCCCE is going to be used actually in order to enhance this kind of training. In parallel, we have produced climate change education and outreach in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, going down to the Gulf, where we studied and assessed where we are in the different countries of the region and what are the necessary measures for enhancing actually this education. When we go to the global level, UNESCO has a very important green school, the greening partnership with green schools, and there one of the common, let's say, approaches for achieving improvements, including climate change, is climate action, is the whole of institute approach or whole institute approach or whole school approach, and the activities that are directly linked, let's say, with climate change. Also, very important, the partnerships with all different stakeholders, and also with emphasis on the school's climate readiness, and also the greening by 2030, which is coming very soon. And in order to achieve that, we need to have a much more active community on and training of educators and schemes, green schemes of schools, which again UNESCO promotes. Also, from the new tools, greening tools of 2024, I would like to mention this practical manual providing for the first time a common understanding of what climate education should consist of, and also the quality standards, because as you know, the quality education is another target of UNESCO, and the quality standards that are important to create actually a green school able to address also the issue of climate change. Finally, I would like to mention the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe framework for the implementation of the strategy on ESD, with its 4 strands: quality education and ESD, the whole institute approach, very closely linked, digital education, which also is one of the objectives of PARCCCE, and entrepreneurship, employment, innovation, and ESD, looking into also the usefulness of education for employment and for the next steps. So these are more or less the framework documents and conditions, guidance for schools, for governments, for schools, for educators in how to place the climate change education within the framework of the overall ESD. And specific on the whole school approach, and I would like to remind everybody that the schooling experience is not limited to what is taught in the school. It is the space of the school. It is the way in which this space is used and respected. Is also the interaction with this space and each other within this space, and how all the above can be used as a teaching and learning context also for climate change education. As I'm using the tetrahedron because it is the most stable structure on Earth, but on the universe actually, as we understand, and also allows us to understand when we have a synthesis of different objectives together, we need to understand that we cannot have 25% of each, or so we can put closer to 1 or 2 or 3 of these dimensions the actual state situation of a particular school or program. And this is dynamic, and it needs always to be kept there and even improve the contribution of the missing, let's say, aspects. So in a whole school approach, we need to have these 4 major components. The one is, of course, the content, what we teach, what is the main messaging, the curriculum. So this is one. We need to have in the curriculum climate change and climate knowledge, climate change knowledge and all related things. But it's not enough. We need to have the school governance showing how the society of the community of the school interacts, as I said, with the space and each other. It has also more practical things. For example, the procurement of the different material we need in a school. Is it green? Are there any provisions to have priority for green products, to the canteen, what you feed the students? All these are part also of the governance. Then we need to see the relationships with the society, the neighborhood and the society, but all that also should allow the school to become a showcase of sustainability. And there is also where climate change, important climate change issues may be introduced. For example, even by changing the electric globes and the way in which we use water, the water economy, or eventually reusing part of the water from showers, for example, or whatever for flushing the toilet, all these kind of things. Even if we don't have enough money to renew the entire school, these are actions that will be are important and will be appreciated by students, but also their parents, the family, the society, as I said, of the neighborhood. So all these four components are important for the whole institute approach, whole school approach, and within that, the climate action is a natural component of the activities of the whole school approach. This is a different visualization used by the European Union, the Guide for Schools on Climate Action. Again, the four components I mentioned before, and very important, for the school culture and sustainability, as they say. And for some points that I want to make in support of the climate change as a horizontal area is support education and training institutions to integrate sustainability across all their activities, and through that also climate action and climate knowledge, climate change, in teaching and learning, in vision, which is very important to develop vision for the future, optimistic, because it is feasible to have a better environment, and we have now many more tools and means to do that. Also for planning and better governance, managing of buildings, managing of resources, natural resources with green and circular economy, encourage and support all learning institutions to have eco-certification programs, certifications allowing them to make improvements and having recognition. Sometimes this can be linked also with incentives, and provide professional development, mentoring, guidance to educators and trainers for these whole school approaches. Some of the specific proposals are to improve the provision and management of educational facilities towards sustainable development, familiarize educators and stakeholders with the practices, theory and practice on whole institute approach, and promotes school plans with energy efficiency, with school gardens, with various things that in one or another way are good corridors linking us to the climate change adaptation and mitigation action. Very important, all what I mentioned before in creating the enabling environment for that. Few good practices and lessons learned from a review we have done in different schools in the period 2016-24. A very useful thing is to form core teams on climate change in the school. There are different names selected, engaging as much as possible also the directors, the principals, teachers, students, other staff in the school, going to the canteen of the school, but also families, parents, neighborhoods, local community, having this core team to interact with their own initiatives also with all others. Also started making pledges of commitment is a very good thing to have a climate action plan with some targets, with some also dates there. To replace, let's say, the windows and reduce energy wastage and all kind of things. A very important thing, of course, is understanding the causes of the problem, which go from global to local and from local to global. Both are important. Local is very important. From where you start, it depends on the culture of the country, of the school, but both are important, global and local. And of course, embed climate change education in all programs, all subjects, even project-based learning, inquiry learning, peer learning practices, all different types of approaches, educational approaches are suitable to be somehow to host also the climate change messaging. And of course, something of which we work with PARCCCE is the combination and use of traditional with more innovative ICT, information communication techniques, technologies, and digital tools with hands-on learning experiences. Also, the evidence from studies show processes and actions that are important. Collaboration, participation, consensus building and teaching how through examples reach consensus, advocacy, enhancing ownership, citizenship, empathy, responsibility. School campus is an ideal place to take action for climate change, and in some places, of course, trying to integrate with indigenous knowledge or local knowledge whenever these opportunities exist. In the good practices and processes, I would like to mention things that we all know, but we need when we design our activities to always keep in mind and tick the box We have the greener outdoor learning areas, which is extremely important. Sometimes these areas may be protected areas, biosphere reserves, or simply the park, which is near the school, or a wetland or a coastline or whatever suitable. The optimum use of existing resources, human resources, material resources, uh, uh, discussing with those responsible. They might be water agencies, they might be energy agencies, they might be local authorities treating wastewater or whatever. Wastewater reduction and recycling, visiting these places, explaining how they work, explaining the importance for securing new resources and reducing the environmental footprint, school garden, biodiversity boosting, composting, nature-based solutions, explaining this and explaining the relevance to all what we are discussing with climate change, particularly in reducing impacts therefore in adaptation and reducing the risks from floods, from storms and all that. Cooperation with local experts, local authorities, media and other stakeholders. Networking with other schools, schools that have less experience where we can share good practices, or with those who are champions and we learn from them. And of course, always having in mind to envision an optimal future instead of dooming. This doesn't mean that we don't stress the importance of avoiding catastrophes, of reducing risks, but at the same time explaining that there are in our hands at various levels the decision making for risk reduction and for respect of the environment as an important value for the future. I'm not going to get in detail on that. You can have there are several sites, many more than the ones I give here, and also some references that I'm sure will be useful for the educators to get through and reach the background that I tried to sketch in a rather brief introduction, bringing together the what I consider necessary background for our work. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this introduction is useful for most or all of you.